There is something Jesus Christ endured before the cross that most people have never truly stopped long enough to face. Not because it is hidden, not because the Gospels are vague, not because the Church forgot it, not because history lost the record. It is there, in plain sight, written in language so clear that anyone can see it if they are willing to slow down and look with reverence instead of familiarity. And once you do, once you see it not as a line from a passion reading, not as a detail in a Holy Week liturgy, not as another scene in a story you already think you know, but as an event that happened in a real body, in real time, under real pressure, with real blood and real fear and real obedience, something inside you begins to split open. Because before the thorns, before the scourging, before the nails, before the march through Jerusalem, before the cross was ever laid on his shoulders, before his back was torn open, before the crowd screamed, before Pilate washed his hands, before Golgotha, before the sky turned dark, Jesus was already suffering in a way so severe that his body began to reveal it before a single Roman soldier ever touched it. He was not simply sad. He was not merely under stress. He was not just anticipating pain. He was not using spiritual language to describe ordinary fear. He was standing beneath a weight so terrible that his body started telling the truth before the executioners arrived. In the darkness of Gethsemane, while the city above him settled into the last hours before Passover, while his closest friends drifted into sleep, while Judas moved through the night already carrying betrayal in his steps, Jesus Christ began to bleed. Not from a whip, not from a thorn, not from a nail, not from a spear, not from a blow. He began to bleed from agony. A physician noticed that and recorded it. A doctor wrote it down. And generation after generation of Christians have often read over that line too quickly to realize what they were looking at. But even that is not the deepest horror, because deeper than the blood in the garden, deeper than the scourging at the pillar, deeper than the crown of thorns, deeper than the collapse on the road to Calvary, there is one moment in the passion of Jesus Christ more devastating than all the physical suffering. A moment so dark that if you do not understand it, you do not yet understand the cross in its deepest sense. A moment so terrible that every other sorrowful mystery bends toward it like iron drawn toward fire. A moment when the suffering of Jesus moved beyond skin and nerve and tendon and bone, and entered the most unfathomable darkness ever endured by any human life. And by the time we get there, you are not going to hear the Passion the same way again. You are not going to pray the Sorrowful Mysteries the same way again. You are not going to look at your own suffering the same way again. And you may never be casual about the love of Christ again. So stay with me, not halfway. Not until you feel like you have heard enough. Not until the familiar details begin to sound recognizable and your mind starts to drift. Stay all the way through, because what we are walking through is not just a retelling. It is an unveiling. We are going to move through the Passion, not as religious wallpaper, not as a sequence of sacred images, softened by repetition, but as real history, real blood, real pressure, real obedience, real terror, real endurance, real love. We are going to look at what happened to the body of Jesus, what happened to the soul of Jesus, what Scripture actually says, what the ancient prophecies were pointing toward, what the Church has preserved, what the human body can endure, and why all of it matters to the life you are actually living right now. Because if the cross remains only an old symbol in your mind, it will never transform you. But if the cross becomes real again, if Gethsemane becomes real again, if the lashes become real again, if the cry from the darkness becomes real again, if the cost becomes real again, if the love becomes real again, then something in you will never go back to being casual in the presence of Christ. That is where this begins. It is Thursday night in Jerusalem. The city is swollen beyond itself. Pilgrims have come from every direction for Passover. The streets are full. The rooftops are full. Courtyards are crowded. Fires burn. Lambs are being prepared. Voices move through the air in dozens of accents. Families are gathered. Prayers are being recited. Rome is watching. The priestly class is alert. The memory of deliverance from Egypt is everywhere. And underneath all of it lies another current: political tension, messianic expectation, fear, hope, ritual, pressure. Jerusalem was always unstable. At Passover, it became electric. Every year the city remembered liberation. Every year people spoke of the mighty acts of God. Every year the story of bondage and rescue was told again. And this year, in the middle of all that remembrance, the true Passover lamb has just finished his final meal. In an upper room, Jesus has taken bread and called it his body. He has taken wine and called it his blood. He has spoken words no one at the table fully understood. He has washed the feet of men who still do not know what kind of kingdom he is bringing. He has handed Judas the morsel. He has watched Judas step into the dark. He has spoken of love, of abiding, of betrayal, of the Spirit, of scattering, of peace the world cannot give, of a sorrow that would become joy. He knows exactly where the night is going. They do not. Then he rises. The meal is over. The hymns are sung. The room is left behind. He leads them out into the night. They move through the darkened city streets, past sleeping houses and restless courtyards, down toward the Kidron Valley, across the stream, and into a place called Gethsemane. And that name matters more than most people realize. Gethsemane means the place of the oil press, the place where olives are crushed under enormous weight until what is hidden inside them is forced out. Nothing about that is accidental. The Son of God is entering a place named for crushing on the very night he is about to be crushed. This is how Scripture so often works. Long before anyone understands the full meaning of a place, or a name, or a ritual, God has already embedded prophecy into the structure of the world. Jesus goes willingly into a garden of pressing. And there, before the scourging, before the crowd, before the wood, before the public humiliation, the pressure begins to come down. He leaves 8 of the disciples behind and takes Peter, James, and John a little farther. That matters too. These are the same 3 who saw him transfigured. They saw his face blaze with glory. They heard the Father's voice from the cloud. They watched for one brief moment as heaven pulled back its veil and revealed who Jesus truly is. Now those same 3 are about to see another unveiling. Not glory, agony, and Jesus says something so raw, so direct, so utterly human, that it should stop every Christian in their tracks. My soul is sorrowful, even to death. Sit with that. Do not let your mind move too quickly to the next line. Do not let familiarity drain the weight out of the words. My soul is sorrowful, even to death. This is not theatrical language. This is not pious exaggeration. This is not a man trying to sound solemn. This is not ordinary anxiety described with religious poetry. This is the deepest possible honesty. The eternal Son of God stands in front of 3 drowsy friends and tells them that the sorrow in his soul has reached the edge of death. Not his body, his soul. And when you hear that, you begin to understand that the passion cannot be reduced to a sequence of bodily injuries. The body will suffer unimaginably. Yes, but what is happening first, and what is happening deepest, is spiritual and interior. The body is going to reveal it. The body is going to absorb it. The body is going to be torn by it. But the agony begins farther in. Then Jesus goes farther into the garden, and he falls, not kneels in composed dignity, falls. The Gospels do not give you the image of a serene figure, calmly accepting a symbolic burden. They give you a man driven to the ground by the pressure of what he is seeing and carrying. He falls, and he prays, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. The cup. That word is everything. Many Christians hear it and imagine only the physical suffering ahead. And yes, the physical horror is included. Jesus knew what crucifixion was. He had seen Roman violence. He was not shielded from dread by divinity. He was fully human. His nervous system was not immune to terror. He knew what scourging did to a body. He knew what nails did. He knew what public humiliation did. He knew what suffocation did. He knew what blood loss did. He knew what the Romans could do to a living man in full view of a crowd. But the cup is deeper than physical pain. In the Scriptures, the cup is often the image of divine wrath, the concentrated judgment of God against sin. The prophets speak of nations forced to drink it. The Psalms speak of it. Isaiah speaks of it. Jeremiah speaks of it. It is the cup of justice, the cup of righteous judgment, the cup of what rebellion deserves. That is what Jesus is facing. Not only torture, judgment, not only death, sin-bearing, not only Roman cruelty, the full moral weight of human evil, concentrated and handed to the sinless one. Every betrayal, every act of lust, every theft, every lie, every cruelty, every hidden corruption, every abuse, every desecration of innocence, every murder, every blasphemy, every act of indifference to the poor, every cold act of pride, every manipulation, every secret thing no one else ever knew, every rebellion stretching all the way back to Eden, all of it, not symbolically gestured toward, taken in. This is what stands in front of him in Gethsemane. The one who has never sinned is about to bear sin. The one who has always lived in perfect communion with the Father is about to stand where the guilty deserve to stand. The one who is all holiness is about to take into himself all that is unholy. The one who is life is about to enter the dominion of death, not only physically but morally, judicially, substitutionally. That is why he falls. That is why he asks if the cup may pass. That is why the darkness in the garden is heavier than most Christians have ever been taught to imagine. And then comes one of the most extraordinary lines in all the Gospels. Luke, the physician, records that Jesus, being in agony, prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Most people hear that line and think of it as a vivid description, almost poetic in intensity. It is not poetry. Luke was a doctor. Doctors notice symptoms. Doctors describe physical manifestations with care. When a physician slows down and records a bodily phenomenon like that, he is not trying to beautify the moment. He is telling you something happened to the body. There is a medically documented condition called hematidrosis, rare, extreme, and associated with crushing mental or emotional distress. Under severe pressure, the tiny capillaries surrounding the sweat glands can rupture. Blood mingles with sweat and emerges through the pores of the skin. It is rare. It is serious. It happens under extraordinary stress. Jesus was not just sweating hard. He was entering bodily collapse under spiritual agony. And the blood itself is not even the whole story. When this happens, the skin becomes extraordinarily tender. The capillaries have ruptured. The surface tissues are affected. The body becomes fragile. The skin becomes more vulnerable to further trauma. So before any Roman soldier lays a hand on him, before the whip touches him, before the thorns tear him, before the nails pierce him, Jesus is already in a state of physical compromise, brought on by interior torment. He is already bleeding. He is already weakening. He is already being broken. And he is being broken in the dark while his closest friends sleep. That detail is not secondary. It belongs near the center of the story. The disciples had promised loyalty. They cannot remain awake for 1 hour. Think about what that must have felt like in his humanity. He awakes them. He returns to pray. He finds them asleep again. He returns again. He prays again. This repetition matters, because it tells you the pressure is not a brief spike. It is sustained. It is oppressive. It does not lift after one cry. It deepens, and each time he returns to them, the loneliness sharpens. Most suffering becomes even harder to bear when you bear it awake while other people sleep through it. Many of you know that feeling. The house is quiet. Everyone else has gone on. No one else seems to grasp the weight of what is happening to you. You are alone with the pressure, alone with the dread, alone with the night. Jesus knows that place. He knows it not abstractly, not as a therapist knows it from hearing descriptions, but as one who passed through it in his own body and soul. Then Luke tells us an angel appeared from heaven to strengthen him. That sentence should undo you if you let it. The one who made the angels allows himself to be strengthened by one. The eternal Son who is worshipped by heaven receives ministry in the weakness he has freely embraced. He does not reject creaturely consolation. He receives it. That is not weakness in the ordinary sense. That is humility at a depth we do not often contemplate. Then the torches appear. The garden is interrupted. The sound of feet enters the trees. Metal glints in the night. Judas comes forward. And this part of the Passion is its own kind of violence. Judas does not point from a distance. He kisses him. Betrayal uses the sign of affection. The gesture of closeness becomes the instrument of treachery. How many human beings have been wounded that way? Not by open enemies only, but by those who came close enough to touch, close enough to know, close enough to use the language of intimacy, while carrying the mechanics of betrayal underneath it. Jesus knows that too. He does not recoil from Judas. He does not strike him. He names the betrayal and receives it. Then the wrist begins. Peter strikes with the sword. Jesus stops him. The ear is healed. The disciples begin to scatter. And we need to notice that Jesus is not dragged into the Passion against his will. That matters enormously. He is not simply a helpless victim of history. He is the willing Lamb. He could stop this. He says so. He could call for legions of angels. He does not. He steps forward. He names himself. He surrenders. Now the night moves into its next darkness. The illegal trials, the scrambling of power, the machinery of accusation. Jesus is taken first to Annas, then to Caiaphas, then before the Sanhedrin. Witnesses contradict one another. Charges are manufactured. Procedures are bent. The truth is handled as a threat. The whole scene reeks of haste, because evil often moves fastest when it senses that light is about to expose it. They blindfold him. They strike him. They mock him. They spit on him. They demand prophecy from the one through whom prophecy exists. And meanwhile, Peter is in the courtyard. Do not separate these scenes too sharply. The gospel writers put them side by side for a reason. Jesus is inside being falsely condemned. Peter is outside dissolving under fear. A servant girl asks a question, then another voice joins in. Then another, and Peter, who said he would die before denying, begins to unravel sentence by sentence. I do not know him. I am not one of them. I do not know the man. Then the rooster crows, and Luke tells us that the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Imagine that look, not vague, not theatrical, not generalized, a real look, exchanged across real space, between the betrayed master and the disciple who swore he would never fail him. No sermon, no public exposure, no thunder, only a look, and Peter goes out and weeps bitterly. That too belongs in the Passion, because Jesus is not only bearing the sins of strangers, he's bearing the collapse of those who truly loved him and still failed when the pressure came. By dawn, the night has done its work. Jesus has had no sleep, no food, no comfort, no ally with power to intervene. He has endured the garden, the betrayal, the abandonment, the blows, the mockery, the false hearings. And now he is sent to Pilate. Pilate sees immediately that something unjust is happening. That does not make him brave enough to stop it. He questions Jesus. He sends him to Herod. Herod mocks. Pilate receives him back. The crowd is stirred. Barabbas becomes the exchange. And here another terrible truth of the gospel emerges. Barabbas goes free. Jesus is condemned. The guilty is released. The innocent is punished. That is not an incidental detail in the narrative. That is the logic of substitution made visible in public. Barabbas is every sinner. Barabbas is every human being who deserves chains and receives freedom because another takes the place. Then Pilate orders the scourging, and here we must slow down more than almost anyone ever does, because many Christians think of the scourging as one painful event among many, an early station on the road to crucifixion. But Roman scourging was itself so brutal that many men never survived it long enough to be crucified. The instrument used was not a simple whip. It was the flagrum, multiple leather thongs, and, at the ends, pieces of bone or metal or lead. The metal bruised and crushed, the bone caught and tore. This was not designed to sting, it was designed to dismantle. Jesus is stripped. He is tied to the pillar, and remember the condition of his body already. He has been awake all night. He has suffered catastrophic emotional distress. He has lost blood in Gethsemane. He has been struck. He has had no rest. His skin has already become extraordinarily vulnerable from the agony in the garden. Then the first lash lands, then another, then another. 2 soldiers may have alternated, striking from opposite sides. The body twists under impact. The skin breaks. Then the tissue underneath breaks. Then the wounds deepen. With every repetition, the back is opened. The shoulders are opened. The legs are opened. The flanks are opened. This is not symbolic suffering. This is tissue destruction. And because the Romans did not restrict themselves to a set number as the Jewish law did, the scourging continued according to the executioner's will. The aim was not discipline. It was devastation. The blood loss would have been severe. The pain would have been blinding. The body's ability to regulate itself would have been deteriorating fast. Shock begins as something you do not see at first. The body fights. Then it starts to lose ground. The heart races. The breathing changes. The pressure drops. The skin changes. The muscles weaken. The person becomes less able to support the trauma, yet continues to absorb it. Jesus is moving toward the cross in that condition. And then comes one of the details people almost never stop to imagine properly. After the scourging, the soldiers throw a robe over him. They do it to mock him as a king. But the cloth falls onto a back that is no longer protected by ordinary skin. It touches torn flesh. It sticks to blood. It binds itself to open wounds. Then begins the mock coronation. They twist together a crown of thorns and jam it onto his head. Not small decorative thorns, but likely thick, hard, cruel growths capable of piercing deeply into the scalp. The scalp bleeds intensely because it is rich with blood vessels. The blood would have run into the hair, down the forehead, into the eyes, along the face, through the beard, onto the chest. They put a reed in his hand. They kneel and mock homage. They spit. They laugh. They strike him with the reed, driving the thorns deeper. And then, when the theater is over, they take the robe off. Do not move too quickly past that moment. As the robe is stripped away, everything it has adhered to begins tearing again. Blood clots are ripped free. Flesh opens again. Wounds that had only just begun to seal are violated across the whole back and shoulders at once. The pain of that moment is almost beyond description. And still he remains. No recorded curse, no shouted hatred, no call for vengeance, no self-protective rage, only endurance. Isaiah had written that he would give his back to those who strike, his cheeks to those who pull out the beard, that he would not hide his face from shame and spitting. Now the prophecy becomes living flesh. Then there is the crown of thorns. And once again the physical horror is only part of the meaning. Go back to Genesis after the fall when sin enters the world. One of the signs of the curse on the ground is this: thorns and thistles. Thorns are not random in Scripture. They belong to the curse. They are visible reminders that creation has been disordered by sin. They are what the world grows when harmony is broken. Now look at Jesus. The soldiers, without understanding the cosmic precision of what they are doing, take the sign of the curse and place it on his head like a royal crown. He wears the curse. He bleeds under the curse. He is crowned with what human rebellion brought into the world. Everything Eden unleashed is now converging visibly on him. The one who came to reverse the curse now bears its sign. The earth's rebellion is twisted into a circle and pressed into the flesh of the Redeemer. That is not an accidental symbol. That is salvation history happening in public. Then Pilate presents him. Behold the man. Those words are deeper than Pilate knows. Yes, behold the man, the true man, the new Adam, the one human life that has never bent toward sin, the one human body that has remained perfectly obedient, the one man strong enough in love to stand under what would have crushed every other life into despair. And the crowd cries for crucifixion. This too must be faced. The same city that could shout Hosanna can shout crucify. Human crowds are not stable moral witnesses. They move with fear, pressure, envy, anger, and suggestion. Public opinion is one of the weakest and most dangerous things ever mistaken for truth. Jesus stands before that human instability and absorbs it all. Then they load the crossbeam onto him. The patibulum is rough, heavy wood, not polished, not devotional, not artistic. Real timber for execution, and it is placed onto shoulders already torn open. Think of the contact. Splintered wood pressing into shredded muscle. The body forced to support weight after blood loss, exhaustion, humiliation, and shock. The scalp still bleeding. The back still open. The nervous system already overloaded. He begins to walk, or rather, he begins to stagger. The city that welcomed him with palms only days before now watches him move through its streets under the weight of death. And yes, he falls. Of course he falls. We must stop expecting a body in that condition to perform with heroic cinematic strength. This is not myth. This is a real human body, at the edge of collapse. Every step costs. Every movement of the shoulders tears the back again. Here. Every stumble shocks the frame. Every breath is already difficult. He falls. The beam crashes with him. The wounds strike the ground. The crown shifts. Blood and dust mix. The body convulses under impact. Then he rises, not because the body is sufficient, because obedience is. He falls again and again. And then the Roman sees Simon of Cyrene. What a strange mercy that is, forced service. An unwilling participant, suddenly pulled into the center of redemption. Simon carries the cross behind Jesus, not instead of him behind him. That matters. Jesus still goes first. Jesus still leads. Jesus still bears what no one else can bear. But Simon enters the pattern of discipleship in one unforgettable image, following behind the suffering Christ, pressed into a burden he did not ask for, walking a road he did not choose, yet sharing in the carrying of the cross. Many of you know what that is like. The burden was not on your life plan. The road was not chosen. The suffering was not requested. And yet suddenly there it is, on your shoulders, and Christ is ahead of you on the same road. Then the women of Jerusalem weep, and here is one of the most extraordinary features of Jesus in the Passion. Even in collapse, he remains turned outward. He speaks to them. He warns them. He tells them not to weep for him but for themselves and their children. He is not consumed by self-concern. He remains prophetic. He remains lucid in love. He remains oriented toward the truth. Yet, toward others, even while his own body is breaking. That is a kind of strength deeper than physical resilience. That is charity under pressure. That is the heart of God still facing outward while the body moves toward death. Then they arrive at Golgotha, the place of the skull, and now crucifixion begins. Roman crucifixion was not designed merely to kill. If the Romans had wanted quick death, there were simpler methods. Crucifixion was designed to maximize pain, exposure, humiliation, and helplessness. It was public suffering extended over time. Jesus is stripped again. The wounds are exposed again. The body is thrown onto the wood. And imagine what that means for a scourged back, the exposed tissue, the torn flesh, the dried blood, all pressed against the rough beam. The body recoils, but there is nowhere to go. His arms are stretched out. The wrists are positioned. The nail is driven. Art often shows nails through the palms, but the wrist area is more likely if the body is to be supported. And through that space run major structures, including the median nerve. To drive metal through there is not only to pierce tissue, but to unleash searing pain through the hands, arms, and shoulders with every movement. Then the other arm, then the feet. The body is raised. The cross is fixed. And now the body hangs. This is where crucifixion does its worst work. The suspended position makes inhalation possible, but exhalation agonizing. To breathe out fully, the condemned person must push upward against the nail through the feet and pull against the nails in the wrists. Every breath becomes labor. Inhale, push, exhale, collapse. Inhale, push, exhale, collapse, again and again. This is why crucifixion was prolonged. This is why breaking the legs hastened death without the ability to push upward. Suffocation comes faster. So every breath Jesus takes costs him. To speak, he must push upward. To exhale, he must push upward. To say anything from the cross costs him pain. And still he speaks, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That sentence alone would have been enough to mark him forever as unlike any other sufferer in history. He does not deny the evil. He does not call it harmless. He names their blindness and asks for mercy over it. This is divine love in the middle of torture, not after the pain is over, in the middle of it. Then he speaks to the thief beside him. One mocks, one turns, one asks to be remembered, and Jesus, while hanging on the instrument of execution, while bearing the sins of the world, while struggling for breath, turns toward a dying criminal and promises paradise. Do you see what that means? He is not so overwhelmed by his own suffering that he ceases to save. He is saving from the cross itself. Mercy is still flowing, while blood is still falling. Then he sees his mother. Mary stands near the cross. We cannot go past that too quickly either. The one who said yes in Nazareth. The one who carried him in her body. The one who heard Simeon say a sword would pierce her soul. The one who watched him grow. The one who saw the public ministry. The one who watched the rejection gather. Now she stands before the fulfillment of the prophecy. And Jesus, in agony, gives her to John and John to her. Even now he is making a home for the lonely. Even now he is creating relationship out of devastation. Even now, while dying, he is not only offering atonement in the highest sense, he is caring in the nearest sense. Then comes the darkness. At noon, the sky grows dark over the land. For 3 hours, again, do not reduce that to atmosphere. This is not scenic darkness. This is theological darkness. Creation itself bearing witness to what is unfolding. And now we come to the deepest center of the Passion. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is the cry many Christians hear and never fully know what to do with. Some explain it too quickly. Some avoid it. Some flatten it into a quotation from Psalm 22, which it certainly is. But that alone does not remove the terror of the moment. Some turn it into mere recitation, some into despair, some into theater. But the truth is deeper and more devastating. Jesus is quoting Psalm 22. Yes, and in it, doing so, he is invoking the whole psalm, which moves from desolation to trust, from abandonment to vindication. That is true and important. But it is also true that the cry itself is real. He is not pretending abandonment. He is entering it, not because the Father has ceased to love the Son, not because the Trinity is shattered, not because the divine nature can be broken, but because the Son in his human soul, as the sin-bearer, as a substitute, as the one standing where the guilty should stand, is entering the darkness of judgment. This is the cup. This is Gethsemane fulfilled. This is what the sweat of blood was moving toward. This is what all the physical suffering was carrying him into. The lashes wound the body. The thorns wound the body. The nails wound the body. This wounds the heart of reality. He who has known perfect communion with the Father from all eternity now enters the obscurity, the dereliction, the God-forsakenness that sin deserves. And here words begin to fail, because no human being has ever stood where he stands there. We know loneliness. He knows abandonment under judgment. We know the silence of unanswered prayer. He knows the darkness of bearing the sin of the world. We know feeling far from God. He knows becoming the place where wrath meets mercy, where justice meets love, where sin is judged in the body and soul of the innocent one. This is not merely pain. This is substitution at its deepest level. He does not only die, he dies bearing, he suffers bearing. He cries out bearing. That is why this moment is more terrible than the nails. The nails tear flesh. This reaches into the deepest mystery of redemption itself. And still he remains. He does not come down. He does not stop the process. He does not spare himself at the final boundary. He does not refuse the last darkness. He stays. That word matters. He stayed in Gethsemane. He stayed under the scourge. He stayed under the thorns. He stayed under the beam. He stayed on the cross. He stayed in the darkness. He could have turned away. He did not. Then he says, I thirst. And that too is more than bodily need, though it is bodily need. The blood loss, the shock, the exposure, the effort of breathing. Everything in crucifixion drives thirst to a savage intensity. But the thirst of Jesus also gathers up the whole yearning of redemption, the longing to complete the Father's will, the thirst for souls, the thirst of divine love in the middle of human rejection. Then it is finished, not, I am finished, not, everything is lost, not, this has gone too far. It is finished, tetelestai, accomplished, completed, paid in full. The work for which he came has reached its end. Nothing remains lacking in the sacrifice. The lamb has been offered. The cup has been drunk. The burden has been carried. The debt has been paid. Then he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Notice the movement from the cry of dereliction to the cry of surrender, from the abyss of abandonment to the act of trust, not because the suffering was unreal, but because he passes through it in obedience all the way to the end. And then he dies. The earth shakes, the rocks split, the temple veil tears from top to bottom. That veil matters. For centuries it marked distance. The holy place was guarded. Access was limited. Sacrifice after sacrifice testified that sin still stood between humanity and the unveiled presence of God. Now the veil tears from top to bottom, not from human hands upward, from God downward. The way is open from God's side. The final sacrifice has been made. Access will no longer depend on the endless repetition of incomplete offerings. The one sufficient offering has been given. Even the centurion sees enough to say, truly this was the Son of God. And then the body is taken down. The same body that sweat blood in the garden. The same body that endured the lashes. The same body crowned with thorns. The same body that collapsed under wood. The same body that hung in thirst and darkness, now lifeless in the arms of human grief. And if you stop there, at the body, at the grave, at the sorrow, you will miss the shape of the Christian mystery. But if you skip too quickly past the Passion to get to Easter, you will also miss something vital. because the resurrection only means what it means, because the suffering was real. The Uri of Sunday is not bright decoration laid over the top of a symbolic death. It is the vindication of a real body, a real obedience, a real sacrifice, a real descent into the worst the world and sin and hell could unleash. And now we have to ask the question the Passion always asks of the person listening. What are you carrying? Because nobody comes to the cross empty. You are carrying something, a grief that has sat on your chest for months, a diagnosis you did not want, a shame you have never told anyone, a marriage under strain, a child you cannot reach, a failure you replay in the dark, a burden that was placed on you without your consent, a loneliness no one around you seems to notice, a season that keeps stretching longer than your strength, a private Gethsemane, a personal cross. And here is the truth you need to hear. He knows that road not generally, not from a distance, not as an idea, not because he has observed suffering from omniscience alone. He knows it because he walked through it in blood. He knows dread. He knows sorrow to the point of death. He knows what it is to ask for the cup to pass and still drink it. He knows what it is to be betrayed by a friend. He knows what it is to watch the people closest to him fail in the hour he wanted them near. He knows what it is to be falsely accused. He knows what it is to be publicly shamed. He knows what it is to have the body collapse. He knows what it is to fall. He knows what it is to be misunderstood. He knows what it is to remain obedient when obedience costs everything. He knows what it is to cry out in darkness. So whatever you are carrying now, you are not carrying it before a God who is unfamiliar with pain. You are carrying it before the crucified Christ, the Christ who bled before the soldiers arrived, the Christ whose skin was made fragile by agony, the Christ who remained in the garden when everyone else slept, the Christ who received the kiss of betrayal, the Christ who stayed silent under mockery, the Christ who wore the curse on his head, the Christ who walked the road until his body gave way. The rare you should have entered so that you would never have to stand there alone. That means your suffering is not meaningless, heavy, yes, long, perhaps unfair, often confusing, almost certainly, but not meaningless. Not because pain itself is good. It is not. Not because God enjoys your suffering. He does not. Not because the cross teaches you to worship suffering for its own sake. It does not. Your suffering is not meaningless, because Christ has entered the center of suffering and transformed what can happen there. Where he has gone first, he does not abandon his people. Where he has entered, he can meet you. What he has borne, he can accompany. What he has redeemed, he can use. What he has passed through, he can lead you through. So carry your cross, not because you are naturally strong, not because you never break, not because holy people do not feel dread. Gethsemane disproves that forever. Carry it because he carried his. Carry it because love is stronger than dread. Carry it because obedience can survive the night. Carry it because the deepest darkness in history was not the end of the story. Carry it because resurrection came through suffering, not around it. Carry it because when your strength ends, his can begin holding you in ways you do not yet understand. And when you fall, get up, not once, as often as necessary. Get up after the denial. Get up after the collapse. Get up after the shame. Get up after the fear. Get up after the night when you could not remain awake. Get up after the day you failed the way you swore you never would. Peter failed and was not finished. The disciples fled and were not finished. The women wept and were not finished. Simon was interrupted and was not finished. Mary stood in desolation and was not finished. And Christ, bloodied beyond recognition, remained faithful all the way to the end, so that no honest return, no broken repentance, no trembling act of trust would ever be turned away. There is another thing the Passion teaches that many modern Christians resist because it feels too severe. Love is not proven by how brightly it speaks when everything is easy. Love is proven by what it remains willing to bear when the cost becomes unbearable. That is why the cross is not merely an example, though it is an example. It is not merely a symbol, though it is a symbol. It is not merely a moral lesson, though it teaches. It is atonement, substitution, victory, obedience, love at its most costly and most real. Christ did not love you in theory. He loved you in Gethsemane. He loved you under the whip. He loved you beneath the thorns. He loved you under the timber. He loved you from the nails. He loved you in the darkness. He loved you when the cup did not pass. He loved you to the end. And once that becomes real, something in you can no longer remain casual. You cannot remain casual about sin when you have seen what sin cost. You cannot remain casual about prayer when you have watched Him pray through blood. You cannot remain casual about your own suffering when you have watched Him turn suffering into obedience. You cannot remain casual about the Eucharist when you have seen what body and blood mean. You cannot remain casual about Holy Week when you have finally understood what Thursday night opened and what Friday afternoon accomplished. That is why the Church keeps returning here. That is why the Passion must be read again and again. Not because repetition makes it smaller, because repetition is the only way most of us can slowly grow large enough to receive even a fraction of what happened there. Before this closes, I want to say one last thing about Mary. She stood near the cross. That is one of the simplest sentences in the Gospel, and one of the most devastating. She did not stop the nails. She did not stop the scourging. She did not stop the darkness. She stood. There are seasons in the Christian life where standing near the cross is all you can do. You cannot explain the suffering. You cannot remove the burden. You cannot force resurrection to come early. You cannot fix what is breaking. You stand, you remain, you love, you endure. Mary shows you that. Christ on the cross sanctifies it. And what happened to Mary after Calvary opens another mystery, almost as astonishing as the one we have walked through today. Because the story of the Passion does not end only with the resurrection of Christ. It also changes forever what happens to human flesh, what God intends for the human person, and where the whole story of salvation is going. That is the next mystery. But for now, stay here a little longer. Do not rush away from the Passion too quickly. Do not run to the empty tomb so fast that you never let Gethsemane wound you. Do not move to resurrection language before the cry from the cross has had time to pierce your heart. Let the garden stay with you. Let the sweat like blood stay with you. Let the sound of the lash stay with you. Let the robe tearing off the wounds stay with you. Let the thorns stay with you. Let the falls on the road stay with you. Let the nails stay with you. Let the darkness stay with you. Let the cry stay with you, because if you let it, this will stop being just another Christian story you know. It will become the place where your heart finally understands how far love was willing to go for you. And once that becomes real, everything changes.